Hey, LinkedIn. Happy Wednesday. It's Megan Wessels here, and I'm so happy to bring you this incredible woman, Michelle Morkert. She is she has a PhD in women's and gender studies. She is a global gender scholar. If you are confused about what all the different changes that are happening in gender, you are not alone. We wanted to have this conversation to really clear things up because I think there's so many unknowns that people tend to go the other direction and either avoid it or fear it in some ways too. And so we're going to show you how to really accept this with all the different changes that are happening with an open heart, how to be a part of it, how to be inclusive with those people in your life and really make them feel important and included. And so Michelle is going to talk we have 3 different things we're going to talk about today. And Michelle, I'm so curious, how did you get into gender studies?
I know when people hear I have a PhD in gender studies, I'm like, it's a real thing. I promise. It was a real university. Yeah. I mean, I didn't know anything about it, to be completely honest. And, I was thinking back because I was giving a talk not long ago and I realized, I was raised among cornfields and cows and conservative churches, and you wouldn't think I was somebody who would go on to get this degree. But what happened was I was raised by a single mom. And so when I looked around and I saw how people were dividing up the work. It was really like men were doing these things. They were farming and, doing the yard work. And then women were in car line and baking things for the churches and the schools. And I mean, they were working also, but it was still really very gender segregated. Yeah. And I was taught that was the way it was supposed to be, except that wasn't my reality in my family.
Oh, yeah. Because your mom was a mom and a dad.
I saw I was mowing the lawn too, she was mowing the lawn. I mean, so I feel like I developed sort of a radar at a really young age for like, oh, who's saying that we have to do this because of gender? And I didn't have that language clearly as a kid, but it's like, you think I can't do that because I'm a girl? That's not true, because I know right from my own lived experience. And so I think that just continued. And I always was just really curious about what voices we heard and what voices we didn't hear, what choices we felt like we could make and what seemed like it was really off limits. And so much of it was around gender. And so I went on to get my PhD in gender studies. I'm a first generation student. My father graduated high school. My mother didn't. She, took the test and graduated from high school that way. So I didn't know anything even about grad school, let alone gender studies. And so it was really thanks to my professors when I was getting my degrees, who kept pushing me and showing me the path and the way. And so I, was an academic. I was a professor myself for 18 years. And I'm a coach right now. I feel like I'm a coach for disruptors. I'm a confidence coach for women leaders.
That's amazing. I love it. Oh, yes, you're doing so much good in the world. And I just love that, when we originally spoke, I was going through a sort of a transition, and I am in my business, where traditionally I have served, only women. And I don't know, there's just like this intuition that that's not aligned with me anymore. I don't know how to explain it, but I just felt it. And, when I look at there's so many differences out there in genders now. It's not just man and woman. It's like you can't check the box anymore and say that's good. And I want to be inclusive to those people, because I really think there are so many incredible people out there who don't identify as a man or a woman, and that's okay. And I want to be inclusive to that. So how can I make a transition into that? And so we had this amazing conversation, and I'm so happy to have you here today to clear up some of these things and really help people understand how they can be a part of these changes. So let's get into it. So we talked a little bit about the 3 steps, and step 1 is it's individual. So do you want to go into that a little bit more? What are your thoughts around what do you mean it's individual?
Yeah. So we each are our own unique humans, or our unique, selves with talents and skills and desires and all of those things. And so the way gender plays out for us, right? If we weren't being told how to do it would look really vastly different probably than what it actually looks like right now. And so even with all these expectations, it's really individualized. The way I, want to pursue my skills and my dreams is different than the way you do. Right. But it's also individual because we've all internalized something about what you're supposed to do or you're not supposed to do. Right.
Mhm.
It's like we're taught really clearly how to do the gender piece. And so that's very individual. We had somebody who taught us this, whether it was in the family or in a school or in a church or just somewhere in our community or through our peers or media. I mean, we have to talk about media too, right? But you internalize it differently than I internalize it. Right. And so it's like my own lived experience really matters. And so I'm living out my gender right now with what I'm wearing. So are you. I'm living out my gender right now with how I'm talking, how I've structured my life. And so are you. So it's really very individual. And we're doing it all the time. I remember when I was teaching an introduction to women's and gender studies class, and people thought it was only for people who identified as women.
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, well, hold on a second. Gender's all of us.
Yeah.
But so many people think, well, gender means women or gender means LGBTQIA folks, gender means something for somebody else. And we don't always look at like how gender is a part of our lives because it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And one of the things we talked about when we originally had this conversation was, if you really think about that as individuals, think about like Picasso, right? You can't, like, if you were to, if you don't take the time to really like look at his work and understand his work, you will never see the true beauty in it. And so gender is similar, right? You can't paint it with a broad stroke. Like you really have to, it's individual, and you have to take the time to get to know that person. And if they have, if they identify as something other than man or woman, like why? What happened in your life that brought you to this? Or, I think those things are so curious and are amazing. And then they bring us closer together too, really opening our eyes to all the other things that are possible.
Totally. And, there's this concept out there called intersectionality. You might have heard of like intersectional theory or intersectional feminist theory. But it's this idea that we're all a whole bunch of things. We're all our gender. We're all also our age. We're all also our race and ethnicity. We're all also, like ability, context of our upbringing, religion, like we're all of these different things. So of course it's so rich and complexly beautiful and individual because no one has all of that mix the same way that anybody else does.
Yeah. Just like no two paintings are ever going to be exactly the same. Each one of us are completely individual, and it's beautiful. It's beautiful in its own way. So let's take the time to really appreciate that beauty in each person. So step 2 was, we talked a little bit about this already, that it's learned. So go a little bit deeper on that. What does that mean to you?
Yeah. So here we are, individuals who have all these skills and talents, and, we're all this combination of all these identities that we have. Right. And yet what I've seen, because I've done some work globally too, in Central and South America and also in Eastern Europe. And just with, my research, I've seen how gender is something that is explicitly and implicitly taught all around the world. We didn't come up with these ideas about what is acceptable or appropriate for people, but we carry them with us. It's like this legacy that's passed down. And even though it may shift a little bit over time, we're still carrying the lessons. And so it's like, we're born, there's a box checked at birth on that birth certificate, right? And still in most states, it's male or female. There isn't another box. Actually, which is really interesting to think about that, right? And so then we spend the rest of our lives boxed in or trying to like get out of that box. That box is actually really alive, and it is sort of like a predictor for so many people of what they think is possible for them.
Yeah. I mean, you think about it, you know, we grow up thinking, okay, girls are supposed to play with dolls and love the color pink, and boys play with trucks and airplanes and love the color blue, you know, but that's not true. I mean, it's okay if a boy like carries around a purse, like what is wrong with that, you know? But I think too, for parents who don't understand, or there might be some fear that projected onto their children of like how that represents them, right? What are people going to think if they see my child who's a boy carrying around a purse? And again, realizing that if you just let them go and let them learn, like figure out who they really are, like you are giving the best gift you can to your child.
Yeah, I mean, and we police it, right? Like we say, no, you can't do that, or oh, stop crying, or be quiet, be good, or you get to run around, but you don't get to run around, right? And even talking about like the gender spectrum, that we move beyond that binary of male and female, that can be really confusing for people. And I think people, they get freaked out. You know, they're afraid of it. And because they don't know what it means potentially, or it's so outside of their comfort zone because they were taught to be a certain way, that they don't know what to do. And, you know, some people think that gender is biology. You know, it's like, as someone who identifies as female, right, and who's identified by other people as female, you look at me, it's like, you know, they think, well, these habits that you have are biology. It wasn't taught. But all you have to do is look at other cultures where you see men holding hands in public. It's very common. In certain countries. And there's not a question about whether or not they're gay. Right. So it's very contextual. And when you see that, it's like, well, of course we learned it somehow.
And I think, you know, just the way our brains are wired, like we see something and we have to put a label on it in order to understand it, make sense of it in our mind. But it's so much more powerful if you can look past that and just look at it from a place of curiosity, and what can you learn from it? You know, what can you learn from this individual by understanding why they've made the choice to be a different gender than, you know, they were normally identified as. And one of the things that we talked about, like that the only thing that is definite in our life is that someday we will die. That is the only thing that is definite, if you think about it. And so what if other people like choose something different? Like it doesn't have to be definite, right?
Well, and like you mentioned when we were talking, it doesn't even have anything to do with somebody else, right?
Yeah.
You know, so somebody else's gender expression, which is how, you know, they choose to dress and act and interact with other people and behave, right, really doesn't have anything to do with a complete stranger.
It's our own fears, or, you know, needing to understand, or needing to just to be okay. Like sometimes I feel like we need to understand something in order for us to feel okay in the moment. But realizing that's just a programming. You know, if you actually, if you just show up with curiosity, not only are you okay, but you learn something in the process, you build connection. Like you get something so much more beautiful out of it when you show up with curiosity. And I think a lot of times, we just like, we project our own fears onto that person and make them wrong for choosing something different that we don't understand.
It's like we other them and think that, like you said, they're wrong or they're a problem, or even worse, people, you know, use words like deviant. And I mean, it becomes really hostile and dangerous for other people, right? When folks don't understand each other. And that's something that you and I talked about too, that the ability to connect and communicate is so important, that if we come to it with curiosity and a genuine wonder, that's a whole different situation than, you know, just assuming the worst of somebody and trying to make them negative somehow.
So beautiful. And so our third step was that really understanding it's an opportunity to be a part of something bigger, to be a part of a community. So what does that mean to you?
So when I think about community, I again think about this importance of having conversations and being able to connect with people, because otherwise I'm in a bubble, right?
Mhm.
If I'm like following my resistance and I'm following my discomfort, saying, well, discomfort means something's bad, then I need to stay over here. But what do I miss when I stay over here? I
Yeah.
miss a lot, right? Like I was saying before, I had a career, as an academic, and think about what we miss when we're not reading texts by other folks, right? Instead of just like the mainstream small group of people that we would read. What more do we learn? We learn so much more. And there's this possibility for engagement. And so I will share a story that I was sharing with you, Megan, before
Yeah.
we were talking. So I facilitate a group. It's online and it's a weekly group. And we talk about a lot of things, right? So it's not just like a gender focused group, but it's a really mixed bag of folks. And so on our first night, even, we were talking, and there was one participant who was a cisgendered white man in his mid 60s, I believe. He's from New York. He was, a firefighter. He told us a lot about his story. And amongst all the other folks, there's a 20 something person in there who identifies as non-binary and Palestinian and, queer. That's the language they use to define themselves, and used they, them, he, him pronouns. And, the first guy that I mentioned, right, the firefighter, he used exclusively he and him pronouns. And so the firefighter was talking about some relationships, right? And just, this woman here, and he was crushed about, some relationship with this other woman. And our friend, the 20 something, said, "Can I ask a question?" And we said, "Sure, go ahead, ask a question." He goes, "Are you poly?" And the rest of the group was just like, "Wait, what's going on? And is it going to be okay? And also, what does that mean?" Like, I could just tell from the faces.
Mhm.
And our friend, the firefighter, said, "Yes, I am polyamorous. Yes, I'm in multiple relationships at one time. That's, and consensual, open, loving relationships, right? And that's what that means." And the other person said, "Okay, that's what I thought." And we moved on. But I was still sitting there like, wow, look at
Yeah.
this interaction. Because this has not been the interactions that I see happen typically,
Mhm.
right? So it was like a really specific space and a really specific time. So I thought about those two people who I wouldn't have thought had a lot in common, but look at, they do have things in common and they were able to talk about it. And then look what everyone else in the group was able to see. They were able to see commonalities. They were able to see how people can talk across differences, because difference isn't a problem, right? In that
Yeah.
scenario, it was really celebrated. And the person who we thought was maybe more of the mainstream dominant, you know, male, in a binary way, he was the one who was opening up and becoming vulnerable in front of all the rest of us. I mean, it was a really beautiful moment.
Yeah, there was no judgment. It was really just open and a safe space for
Mm-hmm.
people to be honest about who they are. And I think that's so beautiful. And gosh, what if we could have more of that in our lives? Like, think about, like, if people just really felt understood and seen and cared for, like, we wouldn't have wars. I think wars and stuff, all these, violence and things happen when people really don't feel understood and they feel judged, and they're fighting against that in some way or another. So yeah, going back to, like, it's an opportunity to be a part of a community, to really, through conversations and partnerships, like, be open and understand these people and be a part of something so much bigger.
Yeah. But you know what else I think it goes into this is a person's vulnerability to be able to show up and like make a mistake, you know?
Yeah.
Like we talked about this too, that idea of do no harm. I see this in, anti-racist conversations too, that there's a lot of white folks who, and has been my go-to as well early on, was, well, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to hurt anybody.
Mhm.
So it's better if I'm silent because then I can't do harm to somebody. And yet my silence does harm. My
Mhm.
silence doesn't get me into the understanding of the conversation. My silence doesn't allow me to even be an ally to say, hey, hold on a second, can we talk about that? Or let's rephrase this, or I have a question, it doesn't allow me to make a mistake on someone's pronouns, for example, and then be able to take the correction and not think, oh, I did something terrible. I made a mistake. And that person knows I made a mistake, and I'm trying and I'm learning, right? So I think there's an important element there too about being in community and how that requires some vulnerability.
Yeah, so does. It really just requires all of us to realize that we're never going to be perfect. And, whether you're judging someone else or you're judging yourself, you are just creating more of a distance when you do that. So let's put all that aside and just be open and be there to understand and embrace each other.
Yeah. And I think we've operated with this binary system for so long that we're used to those boxes, going back to that, sex assignment at birth, right? We're used to some neat organized boxes. And for all of us in all parts of our lives, it's a mess.
Yeah.
It's a hot mess. Half the time it's a dumpster fire, I mean, it's just messy. And I think it's okay that it's messy.
Yeah. So biggest takeaways, like if you are really curious and there is something you don't understand about someone in your life or someone you come in contact with, what can people do? What would be the best response, or how can they approach that from a place of curiosity? What can they say?
Yeah. And so if this is somebody in your life, you have an existing relationship. And so I would hope then, if it's a, happy relationship, a loving relationship, right? Not something that's really filled with a lot of hostility, that we can approach one another out of love and just say, hey, I have a question, right? Or I want to understand. At the same time, though, it's also not up to people to fully educate us. We also have a responsibility, and we have access to all sorts of resources, online too, that we can learn. And so that we can then challenge ourselves and figure out what our questions really are. So it's about like a both and, I think, having these conversations with somebody in our life, if there is such a person, and really just approaching it with the curiosity, the love, the humility, and also consent, right? Like we can't expect somebody to educate us or to teach us. They consent to what they want to share with us. And then also doing our own part, which is learning on our own too.
Yeah. I'm curious, do you work with any, let's say, parents of children who have made different choices in their gender than what they were born with, and parents now trying to understand how to navigate this and still have a relationship with their child?
Yeah, I have. And, some of them, some of the parents that I've talked with, their children have had the gender confirming surgery. And I love that language because it's not like reassignment. It's actually confirming who they are, right? And how they've known themselves to be. But, yeah, I mean, it can be really tricky because the narrative out there is there's something wrong with that child, or there's something that you did wrong as a parent that they're not following, right? The tracks, they're not staying in their lane, they're changing something. And so sometimes parents feel really confused. They just don't know, and they want to help. So they also don't want to harm, and so they want to support, but they don't know what to do because it's just out of their comfort zones.
Yeah. So if you know any parents out there, you are a parent who is experiencing this, please reach out to Michelle. I mean, if you need the support to really understand what's going on, navigate that with your child, then she is the person you want to talk to. She'll help you do it with like so much love and no judgment.
Thanks. Yeah. And I'll also refer you because there's some other folks out there too who I know who are doing amazing work. So I think there's somebody for everybody, and let's just find the right fit so that we can, all show up in our lives, right, with our full authenticity and our vibrance.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much, Michelle. And I honor you for all the work that you're doing to really help people be more themselves in their life without that judgment, whether they chose a different gender or not. And I look forward to talking to you more soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I feel like this is the healing and the revolution that we need in this world.
So yeah, could not agree more. All right, bye everyone. Thanks for watching. Bye.